Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse podcast live stream, our 33rd Q&A. I'm here with Dr. Heather Hying. I understand there has been some consternation in the chat about the absence of my bandana face mask. Let me explain. I went for a ride this morning to see what was happening in the undeclared autonomous zone in downtown Portland this morning, and when I came back, my mask was predictably soaked with sweat. So I took it off and I forgot to put one back on. So that's what happened.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
It's an answer to an implied question.
Yes, it is. It is. Okay, so we're going to start, as has become our habit, with a couple of questions from episode 32 that we didn't get to, that I thought warranted us returning to. And then we'll launch into the top questions from last hour, the top questions in terms of monetary value. 1, is there no merit to partially defunding the police and reallocating those funds to other organizations that would handle some of the misplaced responsibilities that police currently handle?
None. Let me explain. No, there's none. If this were an honest argument, then the point is...
Well, but, okay, I mean, go for it, but I think that this is asked as if, what would the honest argument sound like? And the honest argument does have merit.
Oh, the honest argument has merit. And,
Yes.
It's not like we haven't decried the militarization of police. And I know that for a couple of decades, I've been talking about the hazard of private prisons and the perverse incentive that it creates, all these things.
But specifically, the reallocation of funds for other organizations to do things that police have come to do. Right. And I mean, this is something that you've talked about before, actually. Why are police the first line of defense when people are having mental health crises on the streets? Right. Is that really the right job for police?
Nope.
Right. So
it's nuts.
So absolutely, there is room to imagine reconfiguring how resources are spent and who would be the best people to deal with various jobs. 100%.
Problem is, I don't want to help these people construct their mott. This is a Mott and Bailey. And here's the problem. There is no logical reason to connect these two things, okay? There may be too much in police budgets. I don't know if there is or there isn't. I am certain that it is not optimally allocated. I do not know if anybody can spell out what the optimal allocation would be. However, should there be more dedicated to social programs that make the police less necessary? Of course. Should there be less in the police budgets? Certainly. Following the rendering of police as unnecessary, I look forward to seeing a reduction in police forces by virtue of the fact that we're spending too much on them. But to link these two things as if taking the funds from the police is necessary in order to make those programs work is a garbage argument. Yep. Demonstrate that we are spending too much. Demonstrate that we are spending it in the wrong way, and then there's a proper response. Demonstrate that there's a need for social programs, then there's an obvious response. Yep. But to link these two things is the Mott of a Mott and Bailey, and I'm not interested in playing that game.
Good. Again, question from last time with regard to the Navy vet whom we spoke about on either that one or the previous episode with regard to this guy having gone to the protests and having been beaten on camera by Homeland Security officers. The person says, so civil disobedience is not okay. Sit-ins wouldn't have been very effective if activists listened to police and vacated lunch counters.
Yep. So civil disobedience is obviously okay and not okay, right? Are you allowed to engage in civil disobedience? If you get a parking ticket and you think it was illegitimate, are you allowed to block a freeway? Presumably not. So the point is, this is actually a judgment call. Mm-hmm. And I don't actually know what the explanation is for that vet and what he did. And it's possible that the idea was to precipitate a reaction that would be telegenic, in which case probably not legit. On the other hand, there are certainly instances in which such a thing can be done for the right reason and maybe has to be done for the right reason. So it's a judgment call. It is not inherently okay that it is civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is a category that can be okay and can be necessary. But in this case, it looked like it's feeding a false narrative, which is that the feds don't need to be here, that they are engaged in a fascist crackdown because Trump And, that's sort of the extent of the argument. And for people living in Portland, facing the prospect of having police failing to enforce the laws that keep us safe, it's not so simple. It just isn't.
Yeah, and my history may fail me here, but sit-ins and lunch counter sit-ins and such from the 60s were in part a response to selectively racially biased policing, for sure. And so there was civil disobedience against police, but I do not believe, and this is where I'm not sure, and I'm sure we'll hear about it if I'm wrong, that there was a concomitant move, and if so, it certainly wasn't a majority move to abolish all of the police. So with the abolish the police move that is happening right now, if you add that to civil disobedience, you have now justified any single thing that involves resisting anything police might do, which obviously immediately leads to anarchy.
Yeah, it immediately leads to anarchy. And, obviously at lunch counters, Black people had a right to eat at those lunch counters to the extent that they were barred. Sitting down at those lunch counters was a very natural response. Likewise, Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat. Mm-hmm. Why should she give up her seat? So the point is those were actually absolutely natural outgrowths of the oppression in question, whereas flouting the law of the state of Oregon, the city of Portland, is a different matter and tied up in nonsense.
To play devil's advocate for a moment, it is very easy, retrospectively, to say, obviously, Rosa Parks was right, and having segregated drinking fountains and lunch counters was wrong, and we can see that with such clarity, and we would all have been on the right side of history. And of course, most people would not have been on the right side of history because we know that from, history. So it's not that there will be 100% clarity with regard to when civil disobedience is appropriate and when it's not. But when it is being blanketly applied to every single thing that any kind of policing force might do, that there's something else afoot. Mm-hmm. Next question, totally different. With regard to longevity in science fiction, in Heinlein's Methuselah's Children, ageless humans are created through artificial selection. In P. Anderson's The Boat of a Million Years, ageless humans are created through natural selection. Is either possible?
No. Unless you're willing to extend the definition. In other words...
Of which? Of agelessness?
Human.
Okay.
No, I mean, look, if you're willing to buy something like the upload of a human consciousness to an artificial structure, then there's no bar to indefinite longevity.
It's not possible yet, but it might be. Yeah.
It's not biotically possible. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, there's no reason to think, some people would disagree with this. I think they're all missing the point. But there's no reason to think there's anything calculated in a mind that could not be produced in a computing environment. Now, we are not remotely close to this. And frankly, we haven't even really understood how the mind works well enough to even spell out what the job is. But
no, we've still got some crazy blueprint version of an understanding.
Yeah. And unless you are one of these panpsychist people who believe that the particles themselves have something to do with consciousness, then the point is they're calculations of some kind. And to the extent that they are calculations of some kind, they can be in an environment where you have indefinitely large amounts of energy and potentially indefinitely large amounts of or numbers of transistors that can be brought into play. Mm-hmm. You can simulate anything right up through the analog. So, you could upload maybe. But short of uploading, can you take this critter and make it indefinitely long-lived? Only if you recognize the absurdity of the question. How would you do it? You would recognize that lineage is the real thing, right? Lineages are indefinitely long-lived. The individual is finite, cannot be extended, should not be extended. I mean, extended a bit, sure, but indefinitely long-lived individuals would be a catastrophe. And finally, if you did it for the body and you don't do it for the mind, it's a nightmare scenario. So can we stop dreaming about this garbage and enjoy the fact that life is delightful, and part of what makes it delightful is that it's not infinite?
Good. First question from last hour. Do the protests and riots have a stated end goal? I guess it's just abolish the USA. You say, quote, the police should enforce the law, and I agree, but how exactly? What tactics would you use? Arrest everyone every night? Tear gas to disperse? Money to go home?
Yeah, it's a great question. And
Yeah,
in fact, it's one that I want to ask some of the people who are protesting. I want to ask that to the people who are most capable of answering it.
Okay. Dog chaos.
But let's say this. The nature of a riot is that there is a failure of the ability to enforce the law based on the immediacy, the suddenness, the fact of the force being overwhelmed, right? It's the same thing that creates looting, is that you have a force built for normal circumstances. When something abnormal of sufficient magnitude arises, the force is not adequate to do it. 2 months into a reliable riot, that's not where you are. Whatever resources need to be brought to bear on 2 blocks of Portland, is it possible to bring a force large enough to deal with lawbreakers in 2 blocks of Portland? Of course it is. So the fact that we're not doing it is not because it's impossible to figure out what those tactics might be. It's that there's no will to do it. And the no will to do it at the local level forces the feds to defend their buildings, which is then being portrayed as a fascist incursion, etc. And so, look, it's theater. It's theater with,
weapons.
With weapons. And so
weaponized theater.
Let's just not pretend that it's something else. This is a failure of the local, which is leaving the federal as the last line of defense. And it shouldn't surprise anybody that there's some level of federal enforcement to protect these buildings. That's where we are.
Yeah, and just to speak briefly to the first question in this question, do the protests or riots have a stated end goal? I haven't heard it. We've seen things like abolish USA and, and defund the police, which in some people's minds means end the police. But I will relay an anecdote that Nancy Rolleman, who lived here in Portland for 15 years and just moved away last year, but is back at the moment reporting for Reason, in one of her missives that is now published at Reason about what is going on here on the ground in Portland. She reports just a conversation with just a slight girl, really, like a young woman who probably weighs less than 100 pounds, who's sort of on the front lines at the federal building as the protesters are trying to get in. This is well after midnight. And Nancy hears her ask somewhat plaintively, what happens if we get in? and no one answers, right? And this, I think, is telling that if there is a stated end goal, it's not shared by even all of the people who are participating. And by which I don't mean they don't all agree, but most of them don't even know it.
So I would say the movement has an end goal, and it is the capture and wielding of power over resources. That is where it will cash out, for sure, right? The local phenomenon does not, the goal is happening. The goal is the ability to portray what is taking place as a fascist incursion into Portland that the New York Times will dutifully report as such. And this is that state. We've gotten there.
Yeah. Next question. If it is permissible to litigate past crimes and extract repair from other groups' descendants, might the fact that Europeans' genome is 2% Neanderthal give them a reparations claim against African Homo sapiens and their Neanderthal homonidicide?
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
I mean, this is obviously somewhat tongue-in-cheek, I hope, I assume, but it does point to one of the deep and abiding problems with asking for a correction of historical wrongs, which is that every single population on the planet has done wrong and been wronged. That's just part of what is true. I had a friend in Olympia who, very liberal, very progressive woman, who used to say, I don't understand why we are expected to call the indigenous Native Americans first peoples. They weren't the first. They replaced earlier peoples who probably also weren't the first. They are of the lineage that was first. But pretending that they were, again, noble savages who, just lived on the land in this blissful utopia. No, that's not what happened. So, there have been hominid against hominid interactions since there have been hominids. Of course, there have.
Yeah. Now, I must say this. This feels personal to me because I strongly suspect that I have more Neanderthal than average. But
Is it because of the brow ridge? Is that why?
It is what it is. But
I'm just wondering why. I've never heard this before.
I don't know. It resonates for me. So
I see.
in any case, no, obviously, I mean, your point is well made using the Neanderthals. And the fact is, look, let's just do this the right way. The arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. That's obviously the right goal. It remains the right goal. We've named it. We have not gotten all the way to the end of the arc of the moral universe. But the idea that we are now losing the plot of that and going into a new form of injustice is just insane.
Yep. Really, really a tragedy. Have you seen Ryan Long's video, When Wokes and Racists Actually Agree on Everything? To me, this is the incisive comedic take we've needed. Yeah, it's fabulous. Maybe we should actually link that in the description. We haven't shown it because we don't really show whole videos, but it's, 2 or 3 minutes?
It's well worth your time. It's beautiful. Yeah. It's very well done.
Yeah. Next question. What responses are probable or likely if Trump wins in November? How do the streets of America look in the following weeks? That's from Elon Tusk.
Yeah, I shudder to think. That said, again, the danger of Biden being elected with the partnership that he has clearly formed with what even is the right term? Is it the Movement for Black Lives? Is that what's going on? But in any case, either case is so unacceptable that really Unity 2020, that's the point. Either case is absolutely unacceptable, and the confluence of the aggrieved side and the way it will understand what has taken place means that the parties have just set us up for a national catastrophe. We have to escape their hegemony for this reason. They have set us up.
Yeah, it's it will send us closer to an actual race war. And if either one wins, honestly, there may be claims that there was election tampering. And if there is any evidence at all of election tampering, that sends us, a big step closer to the end of democracy.
And Trump has been setting us up for that interpretation. He's been tweeting about the illegitimacy of mail-in ballots and all. And so it won't take much.
Yeah.
The interpretation will be that this is a stolen election almost no matter what happens. Mm-hmm. Unless, of course, you vote Unity 2020. Right? What are the chances Unity 2020 stole the election? I mean, that's impossible.
Stole it from the rightful heirs, the two-party system. Come on.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Do you have advice for aspiring fiction writers outside of the institution? Literature will be crucial for exploring the intrapsychic and social complexities of this era. Secondly, will you read my letter against Ibram Kendi's anti-racism in schools? Oh, that's interesting. I have set myself the homework of reading Ibram Kendi, so I'm not going to read anyone else's interpretation of it until I do, but I would be interested in seeing such a letter. Advice for aspiring fiction writers, we've spoken earlier to the capture of literature and other art forms by this movement, and it's really a shame. Publishing has been captured, books get canceled by their publishers before they even go to press in some cases, because the woke scolds say that they're not, they were written by the wrong person with the wrong demographics or the wrong conclusion or something. So one good thing at the moment is that it's possible to self-publish. But I do think, just like, it feels like ages ago, but 3 years ago, we were saying, well, University of Chicago with its Chicago principles should be rising, and in terms of all of these students and parents of would-be college students who are looking for a school that is actually resistant to this scourge that is anti-intellectual and anti-reality. While University of Chicago seems to be falling into line along with the rest of the institutions, which I can't quite fully understand, I would say that there are certainly many, many people out here who are looking for good fiction that is not woke. So there has to be an audience. Figuring out how to get the books that are excellent and not woke into the hands of people who are looking for such books is trickier. If the police are defunded, next question, then how will they afford the $20,000 to $30,000 that Robin DiAngelo charges to be a keynote speaker, and thereby let them know how racist they are? Just saying. Thanks for the Dark Horse wisdom. Yep.
Yeah.
As a web dev and college student with zero biology background, where should I go to get an introduction to evolutionary biology? Which book should I read first, or podcast, or else? Wish you both the best. Keep up the great work.
So what I would say is, for years we have recommended Dawkins' Selfish Gene as the starting point.
It's what we often started with in our own programs.
Yeah.
It was the first book we assigned. Had them read it before they showed up for the first day of class.
And if you get the most recent edition, it comes with extensive endnotes where Dawkins himself has tracked. So the book was written in 76, or it was published in 76. And he tracks where he was right, where he was wrong, what we now know, that kind of thing. So it's very well done. I will say there are a couple of missing elements, and maybe most important is the fact that in 76 there was almost nothing to say about molecular epigenetics, and it is playing such an important role in our understanding of mechanistic biology that its absence from the book does result in it being dated. But in any case, it is an excellent starting place. That's what you've asked for. It's an excellent starting place. It deals with the introductory game theory. It deals with the introductory genetics. It deals with all sorts of things that are well worth understanding. So I would say start there.
Yep. And I guess on sort of the other side of evolutionary biology, probably that's exactly what you're looking for, and it's exactly where we started. But if you're looking for the macroevolutionary stuff, the sort of history of species and species level evolution, another Dawkins book actually is even less dated and a wonderful read, and does give you some of the other theoretical things without going into game theory and microevolution, population level stuff, which is An Ancestor's Tale, in which he basically takes a tour back through humans, back through history to the origins of life on Earth, by looking at what each of our most recent common ancestors or some extant relative of them might look like now, and takes from that stories that he can tell about genetics, about development, etc. It's really quite good.
Yeah.
An Ancestor's Tale.
It's brilliant. If you think about the tree of life and all of the branchings that took place on the way to being modern humans, he goes back to each of the nodes.
Yep. Yep.
And actually, as long as we're on this topic, if adaptation rather than evolution in the larger sense is what you're after, if adaptation is what you're after, then climbing Mount Improbable is quite beautiful.
It's all Dawkins.
It's all Dawkins. Well, I mean, look, if you're looking for what a modern view of evolutionary theory looks like, Dawkins is a great starting place. Now, the question you should be asking is, why have we made so little progress from what Dawkins understood? And that's a question I put to Dawkins and got what I consider to be an absurd answer, which is that basically we got it all right, which can't possibly be true given what we still don't understand.
Now, the book that we will have published next year is not meant to be a primer on evolution exactly, but it does provide a lot of the tools that we are talking about as well.
Yep. All right.
Hi, Bret and Heather. I really enjoy listening to your discussions. I live in Portland, and I have identified 31 laws currently going unenforced and 4 related to dereliction of duty. I'd like to start a suit and need a good lawyer. Do you know any? Second part of the question, because there's 2 here. Hardesty said $7 million plus was spent on police OT. I'm not sure what. Overtime, police overtime. They could have ended the riots weeks ago. Anyone living in Portland can submit a fraud or waste claim against the city and state on the Secretary of State website. That's interesting.
So do we know a good lawyer? The problem is, good lawyer is an oxymoron. Skilled lawyer, now, there we know a few.
We don't know any in Portland, though.
No, they're not in Portland, unfortunately.
No, we don't know any lawyers in Oregon.
Yeah, and you don't want a good lawyer because it holds them back. You want a shark. That's what you want.
You're not helpful.
I'm not helping at all, am I?
No.
All right. Was I trying to be helpful? I think I was.
No.
But I was not succeeding at it.
No, I think you were trying not to be helpful and you were succeeding.
Well, I feel better about it.
Yes. Important Portland timeline addendum. The riots shifted focus specifically to the courthouse around July 4th after the feds began clearing demonstrators blocks away from the federal property.
Okay.
I did not remember that. Is it possible that the hatred of the cisgendered and nuclear family is because transsexuals feel excluded from natural reproduction and family formation? For the record, I think the move is being disingenuous in their trans support. Yeah, I think just like with the protest/riot movement that we see that looks like a majority of people are getting behind right now, the trans movement appears to be something that we all need to get behind because it's the newest civil rights thing. But in fact, the question uses the word transsexual. Most of the people who are the trans rights activists, the TRAs, the trans rights activists, are not the transsexuals of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. These are activists who are cosplaying at being something that they are not. And that is not to suggest that there aren't real trans people with real gender dysphoria and a disconnect somehow for some developmental reason between what their chromosomal and anatomical and brain and behavioral sex and gender say they are. There's a disjunction between those manifestations of sex, and it's excruciating. And we know some people who experience this, and it's awful. That's not most of what's going on, though. And so I would say I actually object in the same way that you often object when I want to try to put, a good, try to explain something to the best of my ability with a good spin. I'm like, you know what, I'm actually so out of patience with these people on this one that I'm not even going to provide them ammunition to come back, even though I don't buy their arguments at all. And in fact, I think the next question is related here. So you may want to add something, but the next question is, and it comes with a smiley face emoticon. If Congress was 50% cis men and 50% male to female trans women, would you agree that it had a good gender split? Yes, this is exactly the problem. Yeah, right there.
Yeah. No, it's the problem is there is an honest, compassionate argument for protection of trans people. However, it creates a loophole for certain folks who want to use this designation as a shield for doing all kinds of harm. And so somehow you have to do these two things. You have to develop the protection for people who need the protection without creating the loophole for people who would exploit it.
That's right. Oh, thank you, Bret and Heather. Y'all stay safe. We will. Thank you. Progressives paradox. If a disabled trans person of color states, I think a person's argument should be judged on its own merit rather than the level of perceived victimhood of the person saying it, what happens?
It's a matter, antimatter.
Yeah, it's a progressive's paradox.
Yeah, no, it's troubling. But I mean, we have exactly this phenomenon without quite so many parameters, right? There's no shortage of courageous, highly cogent Black voices pointing out how crazy this movement is, right? There's all sorts of evidence that this is not simply some conclusion that we've all arrived at because it's clear. Basically, everybody who's thinking carefully knows that it isn't what's being portrayed. So, anyway, well stated.
Been watching these for the past few weeks, and I've never been so delightfully terrified. Thank you for doing these.
Yes, we aim to delightfully terrify.
Yeah. What probability would you assign the hypothesis that the woke movement / Ponzi scheme is in part the result of another country conducting social media inception on America's young progressive population?
Well, there's a question about cause and amplification. I don't know what I would say about the chances that it is fundamentally initiated as an experiment from outside the country, but I would say the chances that none of our enemies are amplifying this online is pretty small because obviously the hazard that it poses to the mighty U.S. is so great that if we can get us to self-sabotage, they can get us to self-sabotage, they will do it. So yes, But, is it enough to have altered things substantially? Who knows? It's a question that should be studied using something like logic and science, were it not for the fact that those are apparently white supremacist.
Mm-hmm. And tools of the patriarchy.
And tools of the patriarchy. Yes, well said.
Mm-hmm. And cis people. This, I'm not sure what it's apropos. I don't remember if one of us said something to this effect. There are no accidental discharges. There are only negligent discharges. Full stop.
Yeah, no, that must be referring to the rally in Louisville and the fact that somebody apparently discharged a weapon. So anyway, I think this is a literally false, metaphorically true extension of all firearms are loaded. Yep. There are no accidental discharges because you loaded the weapon, something like that.
Yeah. And now for something completely different. You spoke of how dreams could be a way of your subconscious offering you insights. Can you speak further of the evolutionary reasons for dreams? And do you suppose lucid dreaming could be a further enhancement of this process?
Sweet question.
Yeah.
All right. I will say the primary value of dreams. So first of all, I should say, the more you dig into this, the more you discover that there are lots of different kinds of dreams and that one person's dreams don't look like another. And so there is a huge landscape to be explored here. And one thing I have been saying forever is that we should figure out what hunter-gatherers dream about before there are no more hunter-gatherers, because it would be wonderful to know what the base state was. But what we can say is that an awful large percentage of dreams appear to be scenario building. That is to say, while your brain is not occupied by processing active incoming data, it takes a probabilistic look at things that you fear, opportunities you might avail yourself of, and it runs you through scenarios so that when you get to these things, it's not your first time through, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be fully rendered. It just has to be good enough, and you have to suspend your disbelief enough that when the scenario hits, you can sort of try it out. And I will say I've learned one thing about scenarios from my own experiments with lucid dreaming, which is if I am lucid dreaming, it's a difficult state to get to, but if I can get there, and then I say, well, this is my brain writing this story, I should be able to predict what's going to happen next. It never works. It literally has never once worked, right? That tells you something. It tells
you're saying that the prediction has been wrong every time?
Every single time. As if to have predicted it is to invalidate that storyline. Like the whole point of scenario building would be to run you through things that you don't see coming so that, right. And so my point would be whatever part of your brain makes the movies, the conscious part of your brain is not allowed in because the thing wouldn't work. It wouldn't be valuable to you if it was. So,
your dreams are not a safe space.
My dreams are very dangerous, I have to say.
I'm not talking about your dreams in particular, but no. I mean, I think that the hypothesis here is that dreams are explicitly not a safe space. They are where your consciousness goes to actually make you safer in your waking life, but that means that they're going to put you in apparent danger in your sleep space.
Yeah, there's no point in running you through scenarios in which things are all cool and nothing's going to go wrong. So my dreams are really about stuff going wrong all the time. But
that explains why you sleep the way you do.
I guess it does. Yes. It's a little bit chaotic. But okay, as to your final question about lucid dreams. Lucid dreams, I believe, are an occasional phenomenon, which may be adaptive. That is to say, the discovery that you are in a dream, which usually wakes you up. So learning to stay asleep through that is not easy, but nonetheless, it happens at some low rate under normal circumstances for people who have not trained themselves. But training yourself to stay asleep even when you become lucid, which it's exhausting, but it's fascinating what you will discover you do and don't have control over. That is a hack, right? You're not supposed to have conscious access to your dreams. You can gain it. You will lose stuff. You will gain stuff. So I would say to the extent that humans hack their own cognition, this is a totally valid hack, and I'm sure that it has important positive evolutionary outgrowths. But probably mostly it is not. The reason that we don't have lucid dreams is that in general, that does not bring you the highest value.
Let's just do a couple more here and then we'll switch to the next live stream questions. Interested to know if the two of you have an opinion on submitting data to 23andMe. With an adopted father and maternal grandmother, it's very tempting. I'm not into conspiracy theories, but I'm also aware that they'd have my DNA forever. Yeah, we haven't done it for exactly this reason. Concerns about privacy, and it looks like you have to sign away your rights to your own DNA in order to get results. Now, you could do it anonymously, which means that your data won't plug in and be able to help other people understand their own genealogies if you slot into a particular place, et cetera. But it would protect you in terms of linking anything that is learned to your personal identity. That seems like the only way that I know. We haven't even done that.
It might protect you.
Yeah, exactly. It might protect you.
If somebody was really interested, they could figure out who you were using a composite of who you're related to and other available information.
Right.
So I would say none of this is safe. And, there's one way in which, a large part of 23andMe may in fact be kind of like a Facebook gamble, where the point is actually you're the product, your information is the valuable commodity, and that you get a free service for it. So this would be a nominal charge to collect your DNA.
Yep.
And I think your concerns are warranted.
They're warranted, and yet, having an adopted father and maternal grandmother, of course you'd be curious. My brother's adopted. I think that it's even more intriguing if it's not just I wonder if the family stories are true, or can I add more detail to the family stories, but I actually don't have family stories, and I'd really like some. I'd really like to have some sense, and of course, it can also aid in disease prediction.
Yep.
So, it's tricky, and I think we need better regulation of this particular industry before you or I are going to feel safe doing it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I want the freedom to fight against Bret's ideas in an honest forum. Thank you both for your dedication to the Republic. And next question, same person. Also, thank you for bringing the concept of game theory and tragedy of the commons into common conversation.
So does this person find my stuff particularly objectionable? Is that?
I don't know. This is someone who's asked questions before. I think, the idea is, I don't think particularly, my guess is, but.
Hard to imagine that they're here asking questions in the super chat if they find me particularly terrible, but.
Honest forum.
Honest forum. All right. Well, I'm all for honest forums.
Yeah.
Fora, I think.
Fora, yeah. Not foramina. That's holes. It's
That's different.
Yeah. Last question here, and then we'll switch to the next. This one is a two-part, totally different questions. Would you consider having YouTube lectures on game theory? And do you have any thoughts on the EU? As a European myself, I'm worried that this project is fundamentally flawed and undemocratic.
Yeah. So the first question, I've now forgotten it.
YouTube lectures on game theory.
Well, there definitely is a need for some sort of lectures on game theory. I do think
we're
you
not
can
really the right people for that one.
You can teach yourself game theory.
Well, but I mean, we get this question a lot, and the fact is there is no good text to point people to. There are a couple of papers here and there, and it is far easier to do it in real time with people who already have facility with the tools and who can sort of show you when you've made an error in your thinking.
Yep.
I feel like I'm surprised if there is not, and therefore I wonder if there in fact is not a good YouTube series on game theory already. I don't know of one. I'd be curious to hear about it if people think that there are. David
Sirach.
Oh, yeah.
Was working on one, and I saw very good stuff from him initially. So I don't know. Mm-hmm. I should check in on that project and see. But, you kind of need animations to make these things clear. And so anyway, I'm very hopeful that he's produced exactly the thing you're looking for. But let's
Sirach,
check in on
SARAC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the EU.
Oh, the EU. Yeah. Right. Well, I'm in favor of the EU, but I'd like to see it move offshore. No. Well, it all depends on the structure.
You put water in my water.
I did put water in your water. It's a little practical joke I was playing on you. Yeah, let's put it this way. I'm not an expert on the structure. There's obviously an advantage to federation. There's a hazard to federation. The Brits are now involved in both the hazard of federation and the hazard of trying to extract themselves from it. So I don't know enough about it to say, but I would say my guess was not done very well because it was naive about things like game theory, but was some sort of federation necessary? Is it a proper hedge against another world war started in Europe? Maybe. So anyway, mixed bag would be the answer.
Okay. Questions from this live stream. The latest Glenn show with John McWhorter was stellar. John mentioned that we need a word for the identitarian left. I've seen and like Thinquisitors. Other ideas? Yeah, we've called it the woke scolds, the woke army.
Plague of wokists. How about this one? The civil wrongs movement.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's the movement level name rather than the civil wrongs activists.
Yeah.
That's
I have
good.
a feeling they won't like it. But,
well, they're not gonna like Thinquisitors or Plague of Wokists or Woke Scolds either.
there's a lot to work with there. I mean, there just is.
I was going to mock them a little bit, and I think it's not nice and maybe not accurate. They don't like social justice warriors because it's been used as a epithet. But it seems to me that is what they are trying to do. That is actually an honest and just thinking of the words, a description of what they claim to be doing. Now, those of us who are speaking against it say, that's not justice, guys. That's civil wrongs, not civil rights. But that does actually seem to describe what they are, but that's now seen as an epithet, and so calling them that is seen as aggressive.
I think it's totally illegitimate that it's seen as aggressive because it's basically them viewed from their own lens. Right. They are warriors on behalf of social justice. It's like calling Antifa, even though you don't think they're really fighting fascism.
And the anti-racist, the whole thing. Yeah.
So at some level, if you're accepting somebody else's viewpoint to name their movement, you're doing them a favor. Mm-hmm. And to be chastised for it because you're on the other side is preposterous. So
Are the DNA strands in a tit-for-tat relationship?
Are we talking about chromatids?
No, like the 5' and the 3' strands.
Oh,
right. I think. It continues. Would you agree that all living things are engineered by tit for tat except for the number of variables? E.g., a fir tree responds to less outside stimuli than an oak. So this is Echo, who's really, really smart, but also often tries to fit more into her questions than we could quite make sense of. Yeah.
It seems to me, if we're talking 5', if we're talking sense and inverse sense,
right,
we are looking at
I think
an identity relationship, right? Basically, the same information is carried in both strands. Yeah,
that's just error correction. So you thought maybe chromatids, but that would be that's not DNA strands.
It's strands.
Yeah.
So I don't think so, but it's given there's Echo, there's a good chance that there's something in that question that we're just not getting from it.
Mm-hmm. And then the second part of the question: would you agree that all living things are engineered by tit for tat, except for the number of variables?
Well, I guess I would say equilibrium is a very powerful concept. If you have not spent time thinking about equilibrium, it is worth doing. And that in some sense, I don't think it's tit for tat because...
Well, it's a tit for tat, almost assumes dyadic, right? It seems to be back and forth, A, B, A, B, A, B, right? And equilibrium accommodates more variables. And so it's sort of built into the question, but you...
The dog does not like this explanation.
No. You end up reaching equilibrium as many more than two, often variables, come to sort of an agreeable tension with one another.
Yeah, I'd buy that.
You also don't like that explanation, but you're not going to groan at me like the dog did.
No, I wouldn't groan at you like the dog does. For one thing, I'd be second best at it, and I don't like that.
She's really good.
Yeah, she is.
Mm-hmm.
No, Yeah, I don't see it. I don't think it's tit for tat. I think it's a higher order process that manifests as tit for tat under some circumstances. But tit for tat basically is limited to the universe where there's something to be won. In the case of the strands of DNA, the sense strand does not win at the expense of the inverse strand. So I think it's just not right.
Whereas sister chromatids will be in conflict with one another. Parent and offspring are in conflict with it. There's plenty of conflict to be found. There's plenty of evolutionary theory to be had, right? But not in terms of the strands of DNA.
Yep.
Final part of the same of Echo's question: are explorer modes tit for tat looking for new partners?
Again,
I think it's not quite the right expansion. I don't think tit for tat is the thing that we're trying to expand here. I don't think it quite works.
If an explorer mode, let's say the simplest version of an explorer mode is, critters trying to find a watershed they haven't found yet. Let's say we're talking about salmon. Then it's not really looking, the watershed isn't a partner to the salmon. The watershed is indifferent to the salmon.
Yeah.
Not quite.
No, and that's actually, that's another, that's something I don't know that we've mentioned ever yet in our live streams, but this distinction between having, an organism coming up against an abiotic versus a biotic force. So Darwin famously described hostile forces, and he included in the hostile forces that an organism has to contend with, which selection is responding to, things including weather and geography and climate, and also predators and competitors and would-be mates and pathogens. And the things in that first list, the abiotic things, the weather and the climate and the geography, do not respond to the organism who is responding to it. It is this immovable force that does what it does, regardless of whether or not, when a volcano erupts, the other volcanoes don't give a damn. There's no response there. Whereas predators, competitors, conspecifics, heterospecifics, pathogens, all of these things can respond and can evolve in response, and therefore there's a tit for tat that's possible. You can't have a tit for tat with a river.
No, you'll lose for one thing.
It seems to betray the point.
I just invalidated your entire explanation in one glib remark. But
well, I mean, and actually, with a river, you can actively change the course of a river, and the river will then move away from you. But it's not the same as if it was an organism.
Yeah. There's just a difference between realms in which there's an objective and realms in which there's no objective.
Right. I had a vision yesterday, standing between rioters and federal officers. What are the chances that a group of strong, courageous patriots of various backgrounds could peacefully protest the rioters? Would there be violence no matter what?
Yeah. Good thought.
Yeah.
Question is who's ready? It has to be a large enough group and a reasonable enough group and a careful enough group to pull it off.
And a group that doesn't... somehow it has to not be reducible, even if this is a complete lie, by the rioters to that's Trump fascists, that's Nazis, that's
it will be. I mean,
right. So how does that part get avoided?
Well, you have to be impervious to it. Yes, you will be accused of partnering with Trump.
But individuals being impervious doesn't mean that the New York Times won't tell the story it tells.
The New York Times will tell the story it tells. You have to be impervious to that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, look, we've lost the New York Times. I don't know whose idea that was, but somebody
Wasn't a
blew
good one.
it. No, it was bad. The New York Times is not a newspaper anymore, and that's a big loss. It's not a new loss. It's been coming for a long time, and the last vestiges of reason are fleeing the building.
Mm-hmm.
But
literally.
Yeah.
From my daughter, Days. 1. What causes White's tree frogs, Latoria cerulean, to change color? She's watched hers do so for years. 2. The wood frog, Lithobates sylvaticus. What causes their heart to restart after cryo-preservation? Oh, right.
Yeah, Heather.
Let me go with the wood frog first. That's a new genus you're giving it. I assume that this is It's just had a name change since I last checked in with this frog. If it is the frog I'm thinking of, it is present in sort of the mid-continental North America, U.S. up into southern Canada, and these frogs actually get frozen solid. Not just their hearts, but during hard winters. They estivate, they bury under, and then they don't even keep anything going. They just become ice cubes. Like if you dig them up and you drop them, they shatter. And then
we are not advising that you do that.
They don't restart after they shatter. Frogs, you heard it here first. Frogs do not restart after they shatter.
Unlike starfish.
You could shatter a starfish?
You can prune the legs off.
Yeah, it's a little different from shattering.
It's less dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, these are the tools we have as biologists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what is the actual mechanism of restarting? I don't know at like the cellular level, but there is a kind of antifreeze, I think in these guys, that basically begins to circulate as the frog begins to thaw. And they can only deal with so slow a freeze-thaw cycle and so many of them within X number of weeks. And so, particularly chaotic springs, for instance, can leave an Iowa landscape bereft of these frogs because they don't come out of it successfully. But if they thaw slowly, and better off if it's just once, they restart. But I don't have. There's a big black box there in the explanation that I don't know more about.
I'm going to take a crack at it.
Okay.
I'm going to predict that. Predict is one of these things where it's a prediction because I don't know. It doesn't mean nobody knows. Yeah. But I'm going to predict that there is a battery-like set of cells that is positioned in the tissue such that it does not take what little energy it has accumulated and fire it off too early. That is to say, while the heart is still partly frozen and therefore would damage itself or be unable to start. Mm-hmm. There is some battery that thaws at the right moment that the heart is capable of restarting. It's not too early, it's not too late, and that it sends a signal to the pacemaker, which basically functions as a defibrillator.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true.
Nope, neither do I.
Yeah.
It's a prediction.
And with regard to the White's tree frogs, what causes them to change color? I do not remember what the mechanism is on those guys. There are a number of mechanisms of color change in mostly reptiles, but also a few frogs that involve basically chromatophores, these just things in the skin that can flip, that are often usually effectively a toggle, and they're binary and they can go from one to the other. But obviously there are some over in reptile space, not just chameleons, that have a continuum, and that's a different mechanism. And I don't know what
also,
the Latoria do.
Cephalopod mollusks have, I think, a wide range.
Yeah, and I think that's a different evolution entirely. Yep. Whereas I think what's going on in a few frogs and many more squamates is a shared evolution, whereas the cephalopods is going to be a different evolution of color change.
I'm going to say I strongly...
And then some fish too. And so I don't know if the fish, like the actinops, like rayfin fish that do this, is a separate evolution from the other vertebrates.
Don't know.
Yeah.
And even if they are separate evolutions, probably there's some precursor that they share. Yeah. So this is the way it is with the vision pigments and stuff.
Right.
But I think it's melancholy that causes these frogs to change color.
Melancholy. Yeah. I think that's probably right. Mm-hmm. Frogs are a sad lot.
Oh, sometimes. Mm-hmm. I did see, probably on Reddit recently, somebody posted in, maybe it's the Nature is Fucking Lit subreddit, a video of a cephalopod, I think an octopus.
It's a child's question, man.
Oh, sorry. Well, it's a subreddit.
I'm just quoting.
I didn't name it. Mm-hmm. In any case, they posted a video of I'm sure it was an octopus, changing color in its dream state, which raises all kinds of...
dream state, did you say?
Sure appears to be.
How do we know?
Well, because it appears to be in a dormant phase.
Also, cephalopods dream.
That's the thing, is it's like how many different convergences are represented here.
So, how is it that we... can so quickly say, oh, well, color change in cephalopods is going to be a different evolution from color change in vertebrates, and even more easily immediately conclude, well, if cephalopods, if octopi and squid or some of them dream, then it's got to be a separate evolution of dreaming than what we have, because we see evidence of dreams in many mammals. I don't know if there's any evidence in birds. But I don't think that I've seen anyone discuss the possibility of dream state in any of the other non-mammalian vertebrates, which means the most recent common ancestor of humans, mammals, and cephalopods is how many hundreds of millions of years ago? Like 6, 7? I don't know. I'm making that number up, but more than...
It's early on.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. And those organisms weren't dreaming because we have no evidence of dreaming in almost any organisms that we've looked at. So these guys are dreaming? Says
Sure
who?
looks like
How do we
it.
know?
Well, I guess you would say you would have brain activity that
Incidentally,
is...
different evolution of brains.
Yep, different evolution of brains, but
Yeah.
you would be able to detect the electrical impulses associated with processing that is taking place while the animal's not taking in new data.
Yeah.
And I would say, painting with a broad brush, that's dreams.
Okay. It's at least processing, whether or not there's, I guess, dreams for us is always tied into visual cortex stuff, right?
Yep.
There's at least memory of visual stuff. Even, I believe, for blind people, right? So we obviously can't interview the octopi yet.
Oh, we can. They just don't cooperate.
Yeah, they're not interested.
No.
So we can see that there's processing going on, but we don't know what the subjective experience is like for them, nor can we. What would it take for you guys to pick up and leave Portland? You trying to get us to leave?
Well, let's see. I've had several phone calls in the last week suggesting that would be a good idea. Interestingly, several of those calls came from California, where people are actually picking up and leaving. So, we're in kind of a pickle.
When we moved here from Olympia, we told our children that we wouldn't move again. We wouldn't move them again before they were done with school, which seemed really important because of the total chaos that they experienced because of what happened at Evergreen.
Yeah.
So that is something that and there's so much about Portland and the Pacific Northwest to love, but certainly there are things that could cause us to leave.
For example, like perhaps defunding the police and leaving us to fend for ourselves.
Yeah.
I just don't know what else to think. I mean, at some level, it's such a dumb experiment to run, but how successful are we likely to be defending ourselves against who knows what?
Yeah, we have a dog that moans. What is the likelihood of a free and fair election in November? I am concerned that the current unrest could emerge on election day and undermine the democratic process. Widespread violence can suppress and intimidate voters.
Unity 2020 might be the way to go on that. I mean, what are the I don't know what the chances are. What are the chances that it's going to be 100% free and fair? There's zero, because no election in a large population is going to be 100% free and fair. Will somebody file a phony ballot somewhere? But what are the chances that the election is free enough and fair enough that it actually represents the will of the people? Pretty high. What are the chances that the will of the people is coherent? Pretty low, unless, of course, you consider Unity 2020. Then, of course, it could. But, voting for either of these major parties, that's not really the will of the people so much. That's the will of the people given constraints that are absolutely unimaginably foolish.
How can we progress with effective reform of use of force police? No, let me start again. How can we progress with effective reform of use of force policies and procedures when demands are being made by those with zero expertise and where officer safety is clearly absent? I'm a LEO, parentheses Ireland. I don't know what LEO stands for.
It's an astrological sign?
I think not, but...
I don't know. I mean, the question is obviously a good one. Yeah. You cannot allow people who know nothing about this process and may, in many cases, not even be well-intentioned to dictate terms. You just can't. It would be insane to do so. And so When you've got 3 West Coast mayors now playing with these ideas, something has gone very seriously awry.
Oh, I think what's it? London Breed, is it? In San Francisco is as well.
4.
Yeah.
Yep.
Have you seen German contact tracing event plan? 4,000 at the concert event in August. Please comment. I haven't seen this.
Nope.
From just that really brief blurb, it sounds intriguing. Yeah, if they're going to have a big concert, then the idea that they're going to contact trace afterwards potentially provides a huge epidemiological database that will be, great if no one's sick, and how super useful if a few people do get sick, and then we see how it spreads.
It does remind me.
Law enforcement
officer. All right, so not an astrological sign.
Not a lion.
Yeah. It does remind me that I promised we would talk about COVID on today's live stream, and events in Portland and their implications overwhelmed that plan. So we will bump that to the next live stream.
All right. Exactly an hour. Okay, we will do 4 more. Okay. Mainstream anthropology explains that humans have become agriculturalists only 10,000 years ago. Could this have been a reemergence of culture following a global cataclysm? Might there be an evolutionary bio angle to this idea? So the archaeological evidence suggests that agriculture evolved convergently, separately, many places, ranging from 10 to 12,000 years ago, and then a few places like the New World, probably more recently than that.
But in isolation.
But certainly in isolation in the New World. There's no archaeological evidence to suggest agriculture from 20 or 30 or more than that 1,000 years ago. So I don't. We have both gone looking for the strange, the fringe, the what if ideas around a lot of human prehistory, including the origins of agriculture. So I don't think. I've just never even seen any glimmerings of I found this and it's been buried because mainstream anthropology doesn't want to hear this.
That said, I will be anything but shocked if there are precursors that are more agricultural than we understand.
Oh,
in
for
other
sure.
words,
Yes.
People having noticed that seeds produce plants who may drop those seeds in places that they would find convenient to go forage later. Likely it exists, just as there are precursors of evolutionary thinking that have largely been lost to history. Some things are so important, canonical, clear for those who have been thinking about them that my guess is there will be precursors. Yeah.
And the order of operations isn't inherently what it would seem. So, for instance, bread seems to predate agriculture in, I think it's 2 places. I think maybe South China. Agriculture seems to have emerged twice, probably independently within modern China, and I think it's in southern China and maybe in sort of Mesopotamia. There's evidence of bread before agriculture, so that's not exactly to this point. But the idea that things go in this, obviously linear progression, and ceramics too were widespread in some places long before agriculture, whereas in some places probably agriculture, basically created the need for vessels in which to hold grains. So these things are very different in the many places where they have evolved. Hi, this question begins. I believe that J. Cole describes the Afro-American slice of existence eloquently. He would probably work with you for Unity 2020. Are you familiar with him?
Nope.
Let's
mark that.
I don't know J. Cole either. Zach, would you mark that? That's line 84, it looks like. Second to last question. Viral exposure as metaphorical transfusion of virions? ? It explains the benefit of recipient type O and dependence upon A and B within population for resistance to novel virus. For instance, China versus South American blood type distributions against COVID-19.
I don't get it on one reading.
Yeah, viral exposure as metaphorical I don't know if I think transfusion isn't maybe the right word.
Transmission.
Transmission of virions. And I don't know.
Wait. What is the first?
Viral exposure as
Viral
metaphorical
exposure.
as metaphorical transmission of virions.
Are they talking about non-successful infections in which contact is creating an as-if vaccine? Is that the...
Yeah, I think that's right. And then explains the benefit of recipient type O. But then, it falls apart a little bit. The very question isn't quite accurate in terms of what, I haven't looked into this in the last month and a half or so, or 2 months. But early on, it looked like O was resistant to COVID-19, but A was particularly susceptible. But B and AB were not particularly susceptible. So it wouldn't just be a blanket like, do you have things stuck to your blood or not, right? It's not O versus AB and AB, A, B, and AB. So it's not at least clean, but there might be something here. This is a question we'd need to engage with the person to get more out of it. Final question. My homeschooled son is off to college soon. TAMU. I don't remember. I can't.
Wait. Texas A&M?
Oh, Texas A&M. Yep, Texas A&M. I've tried to inoculate him against the mind virus. I'm more worried about him catching the mind virus than coronavirus. Which do you think is worse? Oh, wow.
Well, hopefully you have laid the groundwork to make resistance to the woke virus highly likely. I would say the thing about coronavirus is we just don't know how bad it is yet, because we don't know whether or not you gain immunity that's long-lasting. We don't know whether it hides in some tissue and recurs.
If it's evolving towards more virulence or less.
Right.
Towards more transmissibility outside.
We do know that it does an awful lot of organ damage in some people. So I would say, let's put it this way. If your son comes home having been infected by the woke virus, he could awaken from that zombie-like state and regain his sense of reality. The COVID thing, you're just rolling the dice with respect to what kind of damage it's going to do and how long-lasting it is. So
I honestly don't, I appreciate the question very much. And I don't even know how to put the two things next to each other. I don't know how to compare the risks here.
Yeah.
Even though, the mind virus, the woke mind virus very much is acting like a virus. And so it seems like we should be able to answer this question. But they pose, we believe, as if you're watching this, that the woke virus poses actually an existential threat to civilization.
Yes, but your son's participation in it doesn't change how threatening it is to civilization.
Right. And your son's brief dipping into it and emerging, perhaps inoculated more strongly than he would have been, might render him more powerful in the world. Whereas a brief dip into coronavirus probably does not make him stronger. So it's a tough question.
Tough one. Yep.
And I'm sort of sorry to leave without any kind of resolution on that. However, we have reached the end here, and once again, we'll say we're doing
the end of the live stream. Don't panic. We have not reached the end of anything else that we're aware of.
Nothing. We've reached the end of nothing.
We will check the internet after we're offline here, but hopefully nothing.
I won't. I'm done.
You're out.
I am out. I am going to go outside. I'm going to spend some time in nature. But tomorrow we will both be back online at 11 a.m. for a private Q&A for people who have joined my Patreon at $5 or up. We have way too many questions already, but we're trying to juggle that and figure out how to answer them. At either of our Patreons at $5 and up, you can get access to the Discord. There's a Clips channel where some of the little bits from these get posted now. What else? I think we'll be back. The plan is to be back on Tuesday. We'll probably start dropping these to one a week at some point soon, but for now, we'll be back on Tuesday.
Okay. Like, subscribe, comment, circulate, all those things. Those are all helpful to us. We appreciate your support. And until next time, be well.